Now it's time for Reid's friends to come up, and now we're going to hear the real dirt on Reid. So, Scott Green, please come on down.
Come on down! Let's go! Yeah, take a seat here.
Here, let me sit so I can record it.
I told Reid's friends before they talked, I said, you know, whatever you're going to say, don't say anything that you wouldn't want our parents and all their friends to hear, and we'll find out if these guys listen to me or not.
Thank you, Shane. Shelley actually ruined part of my speech with the Porsche story. But what was interesting about that recount of the story was you knew almost all of the details. I don't know how that happened. I thought part of that was to the grave, Reid. Well, I met Reid when I was 4 years old, and we were at the Columbian Country Club in Dallas, and it was Halloween night, and we were dressed up in our costumes, and Shelley walked Reid up to me and said, "Scott, this is Reid, and he likes basketball too." And I was a sucker for that line. We've been best friends ever since. And growing up, I went to Solomon Schechter, and Reid went to Green Hill. And Reid also went to Sunday school on the weekends. And I would always spend the night at Reid's house and then go to Sunday school on the weekends with Reid. And during this one stretch in particular, I must have gone to Sunday school for 7 or 8 straight Sundays. 2 straight months I was there at Sunday school, and I wasn't enrolled, but it got to a point where the teachers knew my names, and I was on the attendance list, and the synagogue called Barbara and asked if I would pay for a semester's worth of tuition for Sunday school because I went so often. I was actually hoping Lisa's girlfriends would be here to hear that part of the speech. But I'm here to tell you a few stories that you might not know about Reid, besides the Torah study and the mitzvahs and the community service. So, Reid was a pretty competitive guy in high school, particularly when it came to grades. And Reid always thought a report card meant it was an initial proposal, subject to intense negotiations, where B's would become A's, and C's would become B's, and those would become A's. And at times, Reid did demonstrate a mastery of manipulation. This one time, we were in Spanish class, and the teacher was Dr. Hines. And it was a final exam, multiple choice test, and Reid and I were in the class together, and we would take turns walking up to the front of the class and badgering the teacher, trying to get hints as to what the answers might be. And eventually, Dr. Hines caught on, and Reid went up to the front of the class, and finally he said, "Reid," he held up an answer key, "you can take this if you want, but these are the answers to the French exam, not the Spanish exam. It's no good to you." And Reid took the answer key back to his desk, and sure enough, it was actually the answers to the Spanish exam, not the French exam. And to Dr. Hines' surprise, Reid, let's save face here, did very poorly on section A of the test, but on multiple choice section B, he aced it. Unfortunately, some of Reid's calculated risks didn't always pay off. One time, Reid finally ran into a nemesis in high school. The teacher's name was Mr. Ostroff, and Reid thought he had it out for him. I was in the same class. I got along fine with the teacher. This one paper, Reid got a B on the paper, and I got a B+. And so Reid was upset for a number of reasons. One is that he held his proficiency of history in such high regard, and there's no way Reid should be deserving of a B in a paper. And then as well, I got a B+, and we had some friendly competition in high school. Friendly competition. 6 times out of 10, friendly competition in high school. And so Reid thought he would try to negotiate with Mr. Ostroff to try to get a higher grade, but to no avail, he wouldn't budge. So finally Reid says, "I'm taking this to the top." He goes to the director of the history department and asks that the paper be regraded, thinking that surely it would go up. Well, Reid walks back to me the next day, and he says, "The guy said the paper was so bad, he lowered my grade to F." And one other time I'd like to mention, and Shelley alluded to this a little bit, but at Green Hill, we would get midterm report cards when our grades were subpar. And if you didn't get a midterm report card, smooth sailing. Well, Reid was about to get a midterm report card. Shelley and Barbara, the only time Reid got a midterm report card. And first, Reid tried to negotiate his way out of it, but it wasn't going to happen. He was getting the midterm report card, so he did what every other high school kid would naturally do: race home that afternoon, beat his parents home from work, steal the report card out of the mailbox, and I thought, trash it. But he didn't trash it, and there's actually a Hebrew saying that I wrote down here. It's Ein Mistar Me'enei Hashem, which means nothing can be hidden under God's eyes. And so the next Rosh Hashanah comes around, and I get a frantic call from Reid saying that Shelley has opened the tallis bag. And there is the midterm report card that I was convinced Reid would have thrown away. Now, it wasn't all studying and hitting the books like you might think when I was growing up with Reid. And now that Shelley told the Porsche story, I still do have one other story that I'd like to share. And that is when Reid and I decided one New Year's Eve that we were going to take a road trip. And I think it coincided perfectly with the release of the movie Road Trip. But we decided our destination would be Shreveport, Louisiana. And then we were going to gamble the night away on New Year's Eve. So we were 17 at the time. We looked 13. And so we needed fake IDs and alibis very quickly. This was a last-minute planned trip. So we talked to one of our friends, and if we ever need to speak to the police about this one day, he's an acquaintance in name only. His name is Matthew Prescott. And Matthew Prescott knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who went to SMU. And my dad, somewhere here, he went to SMU. No insinuation on to people generally at SMU, but this guy worked out of his dorm room, and Reid and I went in there the day before our trip, and it was like a crime scene. There was cameras, there was drugs, this white powder. I don't know. I was an academic. I didn't understand any of that. And so Reid and I get our mug shots taken, and this guy made fake IDs for us, and they were perfect. I mean, they scanned, they had holograms, they might have talked for all I know. And we drive to Shreveport. Right. So we're driving to Shreveport. I call my mom. Mom, I'm going to my friend's lake house for the weekend. Reid, I think he told his parents he was going to the library. I'm not sure. So we go to Shreveport. We get into the casinos. We make the toast at midnight. We come on back, and we are free and clear. It was a great story. We're telling our friends. Promise not to tell our parents, sure. And I get a call from my mother the next week, and she says, Scott, were you in Shreveport last weekend? And quickly, I'm retracing all my steps. Yes, we covered the evidence. Did Reid find religion and confess? No. So I say, no, Mom, wasn't in Shreveport. And she rephrases her question and says, Scott, you were in Shreveport last weekend. And I rephrased my answer, and I said, what makes you say that? And she says, I'm looking at your phone bill right now, and you made dozens of calls from Shreveport, Louisiana last weekend. I had no idea that the location of the origin of the phone call appeared on the phone bill. And so this message is really to Karen and Matan and Chippy and all the other Reid's younger cousins. Next time you're in Shreveport, on New Year's Eve with your buddies, know that the origin of the phone call appears on the phone bill. So plan accordingly, or start paying your phone bills on your own early so your parents won't see them. And one last story that I'd like to mention is that I share a special bond with Reid that Eliza and Reid don't share. And let me explain. After college, Reid and I moved to New York, and I actually lived with Reid for a year. Eliza has never lived with Reid. And so I'd like to, we all have our quirks and habits, but this one in particular is really bizarre. And so I'd like to share it with you all. And it is that, do you know what I'm going to say? Reid needs a room to be pitch black in order to sleep. And it doesn't just have to, the lights don't just have to be off. Instead of dim, that is understandable. He needs utter cave-like blackness. So this is what Reid does. He goes to all the windows, and he meticulously closes each individual shutter, lest any light creep in between the shutters and brighten the room. And so I know, Reid, you didn't decorate your bedroom in